I believe that some of you should be intellectually wily enough that I want to do something I threatened a while back. I want to shift a little something on you, having to do with that certain aspect internally that surely all of you have been able to spot, feel, think about, and that is the partnership. That no matter what it has been called in the past, or no matter how you tried to apply what I have described to something you'd already heard, that internally everyone has what seems to be two aspects. No matter what they're called, and no matter how you look at it, or else you could not be aware that you're aware. You could not be what ordinary people call conscious. You could not talk to yourself, and I point out that everyone talks to themselves, and it does not mean that you mumble. But you would not be aware of your own thought processes. But I want to, henceforth, I was going to wait a while until I thought sure that all of you had a fairly well-grounded acceptance and some sort of spasmodic, if not continual awareness that there is this thing right in here. And you can forget Freud and conscious and unconscious and all that, because what seems to be at one time the more passive part, 2 seconds later, 2 hours later, can apparently be the one doing the talking, and then it goes back to the listening, etc. But now, I want to shift it on you, and you should be able now, a lot of you, to follow this. Instead of the partnership, henceforth, I shall call it, and I want to drag you with it, the dialogue. That we're not referring to what would seem to be an actual entities in you, but a process having to do with the totality of your own neural wiring system. Now that's what it is. That is closer, but I had my reasons of going on for those many months and referring to it as though it were two things in you, two Freds, two Marys. It's not invalid, but now let us get more subtle. Look at it as a process. Look at it as being a process of the totality of your neural system. There is a specific need in the three-dimensional world for this dialogue, because the dialogue, this process, I could just call it a process, but until I start doing that, I'll try and remember and call it the dialogue. The process is necessary so that your intellect, what they'd normally refer to as consciousness, ordinary people, so that your consciousness can deal with the three-dimensional world in such a way that everything is subject to two views. Were it not for this dialogue, you would not have what seems to be the all-purpose, all-encompassing dichotomy of life, because everyone has two views of everything. Now, of course, not two views that they can see it from two different angles, but everyone has two views of everything. You know, their view and then the incorrect view. Or, a little more specifically, everyone has a view of everything. Some people can look at an object such as a bottle of whiskey and it's either good or bad. But they have two views. They have an awareness of two views. If they say the only correct view, my view and the correct view is that whiskey is bad. Or they look upon some religious, sociological, scientific idea as either being true or false. But were it not for your wiring system, the neurobiology of your own brain, having this dialogue, then you could not deal with the three-dimensional world in the barely minimal way in which it must be dealt with, so that everything has two views. That is yet another description of me telling you the reason that the human brain, in conjunction with us being aware ordinarily of a three-dimensional world, that the human brain is arranged the way it is. And from that springs other side effects that I don't need to go into surely again, that it stirs up more and more activity, it churns up more and more, that now the two views about every little thing from whiskey to religious ideas to where the world is flat is subject, or creates the kinds of subjects that make people apparently live in conflict. whether armed conflict or verbal conflict. But without the dialogue in each individual's nervous system in your brain to start with, then there would not be such. If there was only one view of everything, if there was no internal dialogue, if there was a monologue, and you looked upon anything, the idea of religion, the idea of being intoxicated, or look upon the actual physical structure of Notre Dame, or upon a bottle of J.D. Black Label, whether it be an apparent noun or a verb, if what you were involved with, you and everyone's nervous system, was a monologue, you could not be aware three-dimensionally. Just trust me. It'll come out more, but I wanted to set that up for tonight because, just because. But go ahead until I start going back and bringing it in as I've been doing with the partnership. But I'll encourage you on your own to consider now of me changing the description, at least changing the name of it. Even if you don't see any great distinction, consider why I go to the trouble to change the name of it, why I went to the trouble to make up a name to start with, and we'll assume that I knew I was going to change it somewhere down the line. So why would I do all that? Of course, I asked you that recently about life, didn't I? Why are there euphemisms? All right, the partnership was my euphemism for the dialogue. But remember, behind everything is something else. Behind every euphemism is another one. So there's something else behind dialogue. But I encourage you right now on your own, consider why I even went through that trouble, and why for months I talked about partnership, to the point that if you were following what I was saying, you saw the validity of it. The validity is still there, but now it is more complex. And complexity is not simply mechanical confusion, as it would be in the city. It is an enriched degree of information. It is an enrichment of current information. I suggest to you, to say the least, that the dialogue should lead you to think about the internal process in a slightly different way. Now, at the ordinary level, you can't even think about the process anyway. You try to think about it, and you can't. It's like that old Sufi idea that's been thrown around so much about that the way to get through life, or the way to throw yourself into some eternal mystical state, is to remember yourself, to remember that you're here. And I've seen that dragged all throughout the Western world, even during my lifetime, without anybody ever realizing that the immediate point of it is to realize that you can't do it. And then to think, that is unusual, because I can understand what is being said, and yes, all right, I'll do that. And you can't do it. Of course, after that, it becomes a matter of like, it's just another rule of some religion that, all right, go forth and never lust in your heart. All right, I believe it. And then you find out you can't. And so, of course, you have to keep going back to the well, and please forgive me, I can't do it. And it doesn't strike anybody, wait a minute. Why is it that these great cosmic forces have made me a lusty little bastard, and then sent out this description that seems to strike me from another view that you shouldn't be so lustful? How about if there was an eternal prayer, or a decent prayer, where somebody would look up and say, hey, ease up. You know, But as I was saying, at least on your own, why did I go to this, if it doesn't strike you as some great immediate pertinence, but why did I go through all this about the partnership and now change it to the dialogue? So work on it a little bit. At least you got until Friday. Now I may not bring it up for a while. But the dialogue, a process, not a psychological process. It's not some process that's been brought about, in case any of your nervous systems are still trying to tell you that I am in some way talking about that which has already been covered in psychology, because you notice if indeed any of you are still stuck with that the idea in the Western world, Freudian psychology, more or less, that the basis of there being two different levels of consciousness going on is that one of them seems to be native, and the other one is an end result of the pressures of society and your environment, which of course, like everything else, there's some validity to that. It's kindergarten validity, And it won't help you at all to do this. Because you are born with it. It is not an environmental. One of the voices, one of the partners was not a creation of your environment. A part of the dialogue is not some offshoot from the environment. It is right here. It is as much an inherent biological part of you as blood flow and respiration, etc. But consider why I went through that, why I've gone through this little process with you, and why I now say that if you had the intellectual wowiness, it should strike you somewhere, if not right now, somewhere soon, that yeah, there was a proper progress to go from being a partnership like almost two entities, that made sense. I got something out of it. But for me to point out, it's not really two entities in you. It's simply a totality of the neural processes. All right. Next paragraph. I think some of you, power suggestion. I think some of you will enjoy this. The real power suggestion, one I always like, is anybody here from Georgia? I'm surprised religions have never caught on to that. All of you laughing, I assume that whether you ever thought about it is comedians leaving speakers, just anybody. That is so common. To get the crowd going at all is to say, the guy's about to tell a joke apparently about his wife or something. Say, and oh, by the way, is anybody married? You figure at least half the crowd's going to go, yay! And you already got them going. So wherever the guy is. Well, it's great to be here in Cleveland. On the way over here, oh, by the way, I assume a bunch of you are natives. You are from Cleveland. Yay! Some reason, religions, as sharp as they are, life has never had religions catch on to that. Like for the Pope to come out, and these hundreds of thousands of people, and he start to say something about what a pretty day it is here in Rome. By the way, how many local Italians, how many actual Italians we got here? And to have 125,000 people go, yay! And you already got them going. See, where was I? I thought some of you may enjoy this tonight, because I've been talking around the edges of something like this, and I just keep expanding it. I think we could call tonight's version, expansion of it, the brain and centralized government. All right, now listen, because a lot of this is right where some of you should have been dancing around. Centralized government. In the Western world, it's normally referred to, I guess, as federal government. And a short history might be in order here, a retelling of the history of our particular country, because it is perfect, and you probably got more passing knowledge of our history than anybody else, except all of you, of course, who are aficionados of the great history of Albania. But here it goes, federal governments, and it's been true throughout the world. I'm just using our country right quick for an example, but this has always been the case. From the Greek states trying to put themselves together in a country to the Italian states. It goes like this. When a country, when a group, a tribe, a people, that life decides they're going to become at least a passing new kind of cellular collection, henceforth to be known as blank, Rome, Italy, the Ottoman Empire, or Turkey. That it starts off and it's always a group of cells. Usually, in our case, it was referred to as sovereign states. You already had these states that had been granted charters from the King of England. Let's ignore the Spanish and the French and make this quick. These sovereign states, and then they decide, it always happens, that if we're going to stay together, we have got to have some sort of common, we've got to take our common interest and have some common source to look after those interests that we have in common. Thus begins centralized government, a federal government. So they meet. The original Continental Congress here in the United States in our history, they meet. I repeat one more time, this is not in some way unique to us. I'm just using that because I thought it was the easiest one to jump on. To start out with, so you've got these 13 colonies, sovereign states, as it were. They send up representatives and they get together and they begin to talk about what we might have in common, that we need to defend ourselves against England, against the Spanish trying to take back over, the French encroaching back on territories that we've already taken or that they've granted to England, and intercommerce between us. So they find out, as they already suspected, or as they already knew, that we've got certain interests in common, and rather than us 13 having to, one of us, like Delaware having to deal separately with all other 12, and then Pennsylvania having to deal separately with all other 12 colonies, they decide that we will form a centralized government. But the centralized government doesn't exist. There is no centralized government. That's not the name of a state. That's not a colony. There are 13 colonies. There is no 14th colony. They get together and they decide, all right, we need a centralized place to look after the interests we have in common. Let's call it a federal government. The federal government, since it doesn't exist, the centralized power, the centralized government, since it doesn't exist, it has no power except that power which these sovereign states, these separate states, grant to it. The representatives from these colonies get together and they decide, all right, we will let the federal government take care of declaring war on other governments rather than us trying to do it piecemeal. And then they decide, the federal government will decide what tariffs, if any, should be enforced in commerce between our individual states. Okay. So they go down the list and they pick out things, and then they give those powers, subject to some sort of referendum back with the home people to begin with, but they give those powers to the federal government. Here's the point. The centralized government, as it starts, has no power. Everybody grasp this because it is just right. It's not a history lesson, but there is a reason I'm bringing it up, and I call it the brain and the centralized government. The central government has no powers whatsoever. It doesn't even exist. It is put together through the powers that these individual sovereign states give to it. You got me? That's all it has. Even our Constitution points that out specifically, that all the powers lie with the states except that which is specifically given over to the federal government, to the central government. Everybody got that? And so, let us carry it just a wee bit further into history. The central government, the federal government gets established in all the states, now send up representatives. And so they all meet there. But who do they work for? The congressmen from New York, the senators from California, the representatives from Georgia. Who do they work for? Well, you would say they work for the people in their respective states. New York, California, Georgia, and Minnesota if it's still a state. They work for them. They work for them. But now, how do things work out? Now, right quick. Let's jump right up to contemporary times. Your congressmen, your senators up there in Washington, D.C. now, you elected them. They represent you. But now how have things worked out? I'll answer for you. Listen to me. Just a statement of fact. It's true here. It's been true throughout history. Who do they now apparently, if you just look at it, just try to take a step in a direction that everybody would think is toward that great area of objectivity, impartiality, and look at it, they act and they feel and they think now more like they work for the federal government than for the sovereign states. Now sure, they got to go back every 2 or 6 years and stand for election and try to get reelected. But think about it. You read enough, you see enough, you should be able to feel what I'm saying. Once past a certain point that a centralized government in some area on life's body, on this planet, that there is established and it's well functioning, that particular country, that state, is now a stable, viable entity that can be identified as Albania, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the United States. Then those representatives from the constituent parts then begin to think and to act as though they're working for the federal government, which doesn't really exist, except insofar as the individual parts turn over powers, right? You remember that? But they act as though. Think about it. You should be able to feel that. It's not a matter of entirely, and I know that the senators will stand up and say, well, wait a minute, I can't vote for this bill because it would have an adverse effect on my poor people back home. But generally it has to do with the kind of effect it's going to have on his career, on the way in which he'll be able to deal with other members of the body there at the federal level. Do you follow me? It's just a fact, and it's true throughout history, everywhere it happens. Now, since you know that I'm not here to teach history, can you see the parallel between the growth of the human nervous system into the brain? And the brain started out in a very parallel way as being a centralized government, and now the sovereign states, the parts, now seem to be working for the brain, for the centralized government, for the federal government. Now the lower parts, the constituents, the parts that turned over power, as it were, to this federal government, it's now as though, instead of them working for themselves, their whole existence is based upon working for the central government. No? I'll take a sip and think about it. Not me, you. Well, this is not a matter, if any of you were waiting for your own nervous system to kick into some kind of overdrive, this is not a matter of me revealing something that you go, aha, we finally reached one of the fatal flaws. It's not a flaw, but without an understanding of this, you're left with dealing with two-dimensional psychology, 1.5-dimensional attempts at so-called religious theology or theory trying to explain why people act like they act, why men seem to be, from the more religious view, intrinsically evil or incapable of actually being decent and living by the rules that the great gods have sent down, or politically, why it is it seems that men will not work in ways for their own best interest, why they will do things that do not serve the best interest of the whole community. I've just described. There is a situation that is not understood, that is not recognized, that in a sense, in a real parallel sense, the development throughout the history and throughout your particular history of your lifetime, it's as though the lesser, the lower parts, the more simplistic parts, in the same way that the colonies were more simplistic than the men in toto that congregated and created, or that were the parts of the Continental Congress. As now, you could look at the voters as being more simplistic in toto than in toto the federal government and those that they have elected to represent them, because who they have elected and sent to represent them now, by and large, in a way that cannot be proven, you either got to feel it or not, because it is no way to describe this, and certainly I can't begin to prove it in the 3 or 4-dimensional world, but those who are now in powers of being representatives of the lowers of the sovereign states, the individual functions, the individual organs, the lower parts of the states and the human, that which now represents them really is representing the federal government and not the states, not the people back home. I repeat again, they got to represent them some now. You can't get elected to Congress and then just forget all about the people back home, whether you're from Missouri or Minnesota. You can't do that now. But if you get up close to the corner and start to look around where I'm pointing, generally speaking, those who stay there, those who gain some power, those that apparently belong in the halls of Congress, in the federal government here and in other parts of the world and in other parts of history, they end up with a field, and they think as though they're working for this fictitious sort of federal government, this centralized government whose only power is that which the lower parts have given through at least acquiescence. And who realizes this? Nobody involved. Nobody. Because now, to jump the metaphors back right quick, if I grab people in the city congressmen and senators and told them all this, they'd go, wait a minute. There might be a few crazy people here that just, they get all carried away with some kind of atomic fever or the Beltway syndrome, and they believe, yeah, I only live to be here in Washington and get all the perks of being a senator. But boy, if they forget all about looking after the interests of people back home, they won't be here long. But the rest of us, what you said can't be true. We got to look after the interests of people back home. See, I can't prove it. And if I said, yeah, but don't you hear what I'm saying? Don't you ever get the feel that Washington is it? That your intelligence, your consciousness, the purpose of your life doesn't go beyond the Beltway. You're just, it's here. Someone might go, well, no, you can't get into that. No, you can't do that. But they do. They got no choice. It is now, in a certain way, and it's not right or wrong, I tell you again, not only in the world of politics apparently out there, but internally. It's not a matter of me finding some flaw and now pointing it out. I'm pointing out a situation that is not seen, that cannot be seen by ordinary intelligence. Your full state is in a similar situation wherein the brain, as it should be doing, leads many things. It leads that which only it can lead. It makes decisions that only it can make. But now, rather than from a certain view that is outside, that is beyond the three-dimensional world, and certainly beyond the view inherent in the dialogue of being able to see things coming in pairs, is way beyond that. That the lower functions, rather than now being represented by this, have almost lost any representation, and the brain just operates. Now, the more you are brainy, that is, the more you're in the Western world, the more that you are yellow circuit driven, the more you are sophisticated and up to date, the more this is true. The more complex you are, the more this is true. I see a lot of you still feel like you're missing something. I can give you a couple of crude ones. Just right on the money if you can hear this. You got the brain now. And those of you just seeing tapes like this, maybe for the first few times, none of this is absolute. Everything, all these maps, all these ideas, these sketches I'm giving are always ad hoc. And so if you're going to try and let your own dialogue talk to you about, wait a minute, I can see things that might be exceptions to that. If you're going to do that, you're going to miss it. But here was the crude and direct example I was going to offer, or a couple. It's as though today, in the Western world, educated, up-to-date people like you and you and you and you, I'll leave me out. It's as though the brain has decided, does decide, that it's time we took up exercise. It's time we changed our diet and got healthier. It's as though the brain decided, as opposed to, in some way, the lower states, the lesser sovereignties, in some way decide on their own as, hey, we're becoming fat, we're lazy, we're getting stiff, we could be the poster child for a potato couch campaign. It's as though the brain, the federal government, decides, well, what we need is exercise. When, in fact, the brain does not exercise. Right? Well, you obviously hear what I'm saying back to the 3D level. The brain, there is no physical exercise literally for the brain. It has no muscles. There's no way to build up its endurance, to make it stronger, to make it limberer in the ordinary sense. But it decided. It's like the federal government deciding, well, we need more taxes. And so they increase the taxes on all the sovereign states. But the federal government pays no taxes. But the federal government decides, well, everyone should do so-and-so. And it sends out the word. And everybody has to do so-and-so. Do you see a little more? It's as though the brain, without, and this is all ad hoc now, so don't look for a crack in this. It's as though the brain can decide to change anything. We'll change our diet, we'll change our form of exercise, we'll change our sex. Think about that if you think exercise is something. That the brain can suddenly decide, I think I'll become a woman. And the poor guy, think about all his lower parts, if I may put it that way, to go, good God, are you kidding? They didn't decide. It's as though his brain went. It's as though the brain can decide anything except this, to change its own mind. That would be tantamount to the federal government, not only here but throughout the world. The seat of power deciding, well, this has gone on long enough, let's dissolve and all go home and forget about it. Hold your little breath. That is not the way life works. So it's as though the brain can decide can change anything. From the way the other parts function, what we're going to feed them, well, we're going to cut out white sugar. Did your stomach, did your pancreas decide too much sugar, too much sugar? Now don't get into whether something could have been happening and the message finally got to your brain. I'm talking about the way that it appears to the dialogue, to ordinary consciousness now. It's as though the brain, that you're sitting around and you read article after article about the damage, the long-range damage being done by the ordinary consumption of white refined sugar. And it's as though finally your brain, after reading the 14th article this month, it's as though your brain, your federal government, sends word to all the states, all right, this is enough. It's gone enough. You guys can't look after yourself. We're not going to let any more white refined sugar be sold or consumed in any state. It just makes a declaration. They just pass it. That's the way that it seems that the brain can decide. The federal government, the centralized government, can now decide to change anything. What the hell does the brain have to do with it? It's like, as I was trying to get you to see, they can decide, all right, we're going to increase taxes. Everybody's got to pay 10% more taxes. The federal government can say that because the federal government really doesn't exist and it pays no taxes. It can change anything but its own mind. It can change any diet except what it gets. It can change everyone else's awareness, apparently. Like, all right, I want you legs and you arms and you lungs. I want you to get in the morning at 7 and I want you to run. Did your legs tell you that? And, you know, notwithstanding the fact that if you are rightly balanced, if you sit around too long and you're in some kind of ordinary middle-class physical condition, that finally your legs would, in a sense, kind of say. But that's not the way it appears to operate. It appears that the brain decides, all right, the rest of you people, here's what we're going to do. There is an even more complex connection between this and the general operations of humans and their thinking process that I'm going into tonight. It is so good, it's right up at the corner, right at the edge of going around. But consider why I've changed the partnership to the dialogue, why I went through 5 minutes of setup for federal government, because it is a perfect, as always, example. Because nothing happens out here, apparently, that has not happened in here. Surely all of you caught on. It's just I'm one of the only ones that can see it, or I'm the best person that I can see it right now. It all is an absolute reflection of what goes on in the human nervous system. It can't be otherwise unless you believe that there are flying pigs. Or, if you're real good, unless you believe that there are no such things as flying pigs. Or, if you would agree with remember the famous scientist that let the guy get up and give his theory about how the brain works in a certain way, and they went, no, we hear what you're saying, but it's physically impossible for the brain to work that way. And the guy thought, well, how was I able to explain it then? That's like saying, well, wait, gods don't exist. People don't talk to gods. Really? Flying saucers don't exist. People don't actually see things that look like flying tugboats. Really? Why did I go through all of that? And I'm hinting to you that there is something very specifically right around the corner, right past this, that I'm not going to go into. That all over the world, when tribes of people, collections of people, who are simply collections of cells, when they get bundled up together and life drives them together and they're beginning to show burgeoning nationalistic tendencies, then the first thing they're going to do, well, they got to have a leader. It's all coming together, but tonight I'm trying to get you to see the individual parts, these little groups, different families, different city-states, different cultural groups. They're drawn in together, and they may all stand there together for a while and talk about how little they have in common. All of the diverse religious persuasions, nationalistic persuasions they have, and they go, yeah, but they are driven to realize, all right, for some reason, we're about to become some kind of nation here, and so what we need to do is look for the things we've got in common, because we can't keep dickering with each other like this. We'll never get anywhere, and we're going to have to set up, what do we call it? Oh, kind of a centralized government. Always. That is the growth of the human nervous system into the great brain. That's the Washington, D.C. of your nervous system. Or you can look at it, start out Philadelphia, I guess, but it is now Washington, D.C. in everybody. Another part of the world, in Russia, it's St. Petersburg, or now Moscow. And there is a process, and I've described it sort of crudely, but there's another little step I'm going to leave you to look for on your own, those of you who sense anything to this, that the only way this thing can operate, Washington, D.C., Moscow, any centralized government, is the pre-existing parts, the sovereign states, the more simplistic entities. They get together and they realize we've got things in common, and the more efficient way would be we're going to turn over some of our individual powers. It's as though the liver, the pancreas, West Virginia, Florida, Maine, all right, we're going to take part of our powers and we're going to turn it over to the federal government, to the brain, because some of this could be done more efficiently to have one place to make these decisions. And it's true. But then it's as though that's forgotten. And then those running Washington, D.C., do they feel like that they actually are working for the people in the hills and hollows of West Virginia, in the swamps and the lowlands of Florida? Not hardly. Not except around election time. The rest of the time, it's as though they're working for this non-existent, this vaguely existent, nebulous concept of a federal government. They don't say it. They don't come out. You won't get anybody sober. You won't get a senator or a congressman to admit, hey, don't you feel like you work for the federal government instead of people back home? They're going to say, certainly not. You're crazy. That's their brain. Is everybody up here that's working in me, are you working up here? Are you working, for the good of it all? What a silly question. Would I hurt you? Would I turn on you? Do I not represent you? It says to your liver, to your stomach, to your throat. Where's your throat? No, it's never been to Washington. Your pancreas has never been to Moscow. It, so to speak, has to take the word of its leaders, of its representatives. Think about it. There is something I want to connect this to tonight, and it's this. You remember the story of a few nights ago about the kid that was watching a world leader make some comment that just the kid could fathom no basis for it. And he asked his father, how can this man, this repute, this reputation, even I've been impressed what I knew about him, how can he stand there and make this kind of statement to people? When he's got to know, if he's anything like he's reputed to be, he's got to know better. And the father said, you remember, son, just assume that he's being insincere. Believe it or not, I'm going to connect what I've been talking about to that. Are you ready? Look at your internal government as being your leaders, by and large, your leaders, and consider that the Father gave a fair response to the question of his Son. Just assume all of this, that it's being insincere. if my example of the Father and Son were drug in and now make them a part of all of tonight's monologue thus far. Of course, this is not a monologue, it's a trialogue. That you would look upon your brain, right quick, look upon your brain as being that which was a suitable, predictable, necessary outcome of all of your lower sovereign parts, the constituents down here, have turned over certain powers to the brain. And it's now your leader, or your leaders, your representatives, which I've already suggested to you most strongly, now, by and large, feel as though they work up here for this, rather than a continuing awareness and concern to the lower parts that turned over their powers, certain parts of their powers, to make this possible. So now you have, if you want to look at it as being it, your brain, or the process, and we'll call it they, the representatives, that they now make the proclamations. They tell you, which is part of what the dialogue is, about what you think, what you believe. You respond, at least verbally. If not verbally, then silently, tacitly, to the TV, to things you read, to things you think about yourself. You respond to other people, to other leaders. What if all of this would still fit into what the Father told the Son, that rather than looking upon some of the things you think, you and everybody else, as being dumb, how could I think that, how could somebody else think that all the leaders of everyone's government just assume that they're all insincere? To quote myself again, that wouldn't explain a lot. It's as though your brain, it's as though all of the senators, the congressmen, even the president, the prime ministers, who got to depend upon the support of the other people, even tyrants do. They got to depend upon at least the passive support of those that they're tyrannizing. They've got to look upon them for support. So look upon your own brain that it doesn't really say what it wants to. It says what it is made to say, and then it has to pretend as though it's serious and sincere. Or else the tyrant, the prime minister, the president will be driven from office. And it's not a matter that you particularly like what he says, but he's got to appear to be sincere. You got to think, or you would call it feel, but you got to think that he is sincere. But what if nobody, no leader can be sincere? Since to begin with, he is not working for the best interest of those that elected him. Turn the tape over. Rather than leave it even at one of my quasi-rhetorical places of me saying, what if? Consider if that was true about your brain. Let me just state, for what I was going to carry it a bit further, let me point out that there is a way in which you could properly look at the operations of ordinary intelligence as being exactly what I am describing. That there is somebody, a process, somebody, somebody's, the process, the activity of your brain that by and large seems to be your leader. And that it is made to say certain things that it does not have any particular belief in, no knowledge of, no foundation, but it's made to say them. The same way the president has got to come out under certain conditions, a prime minister, a general somewhere has got to come out under certain conditions and say, well, we're doing so and so, and I can assure you that such and such will happen. And the little kid somewhere may look at that and go, it can't be true. He can't mean that. There's no basis for him saying that. But he says it, and the people do not revolt. Whether it be a political entity or whether it be a religious collection of people, that from one view, the kid somewhere says, how can he say that, but how can he get by with it? How can anybody believe that? And all the people hear it and go, well. And he goes, how can they do that? And the Father says, assume he's being insincere. Now, that didn't really make any comment about the people, why they'd put up with it. From one view, that which seems to be you up here, that part of your nervous system, which most of you, that's the most real part of you, as opposed to your liver, your non-speaking parts. This is made to say certain things. It's just made to say them, does not believe them, had never thought them, and has to say them in a way that appears to be sincere. But from a certain view, you can see that it is not sincere. But it has no choice. It has got to treat certain things as important. Got to treat certain matters seriously. It has no choice. The people, your lower parts, that part of the dialogue in you that apparently is listening to that part of you, must take certain of the matters quite seriously. You've got no choice. But what if? It can be seen that what it is forced to say, it can't be otherwise, but what it is forced to say, it does not mean. The other description is better for those of you that are following the particular line I'm drawing. It is forced to be insincere, because nothing ordinary intelligence says does it in any way think. It did not think it. The closest you will ever come to thinking is to get to the point that I've been talking about all this time, that there is a spot. The parts of the brain, they're now not operating. To get above that level. To ever do that. And some of you have had experience with this. It's not like I'm talking about something that you may or may not do. It's when you see things about life, connections. When you begin to see that behind that is that, and behind that is that. You see it, and you know that nobody else can see it. You know that you could live without seeing it. You know that nobody's ever seen it that way. But there's no question. You don't wonder, am I seeing something or hallucinating? That's the closest to ever seeing that you actually thought anything. But notice this. The voice that says that to you is neither sincere nor insincere. It just is. You don't ever question it. And if you got any sense, you don't ever even tell anybody about it. You might tell me, or you might want to, but you don't ever tell anybody because you realize there's nobody to tell. If what I'm describing is a fair representation of what I was going to hit as I went by, notice, if I describe this to ordinary intelligence, ordinary people, they would say, well, wait a minute, what you're describing about the leaders of the world, religious, political, everybody, and what you're saying about everybody individual, their own brain, you know what you're describing? They got a name for people like that. Now, I say, all right, what is it? They say, hypocrites. And I would say this, if you're alive, you're a hypocrite. Well, all right, I can be a little more specific. There are two classes of people that are hypocrites, and there's no escape from it, and that's men and women. If you are alive, if your brain alive, you are a hypocrite in the sense, I would have never used the word, because it's prejudicial. And it's meant to in the city. I don't know the city definition, but you do know, as you've got as much conception of this as I do, hypocrite is a pejorative term. It's somebody who says one thing and does something else, I guess is the general definition of it. But hell, that's being alive. It's not saying, well, that's being alive and not being a good Christian or a good Jew or whatever. It's being alive. It's being the Pope. It's being a Prime Minister. But since a lot of you laughed, take their term hypocrite, what it is. I have just described the reason why. It's because this thing at ordinary level is forced to say things, and it's insincere. It doesn't know it, and it has no recourse. It can't be sincere. But what it amounts to, from an ordinary view, if an ordinary view could see it, it would go, like the father told the kid, well, assume that the brain's being insincere. That's the closest it comes to making any sense. That, oh, all right. So life seems to produce these world leaders that seem to know more. They got to know secrets that we don't about the way life operates, or maybe they're in touch with gods or people from other planets, other parts of the universe, and so they have to tell us certain things, but they know they're not true. Now that's the kind of thing, back at city level, that somebody could think about what I'm saying. And it's not without some validity as a very, very temporary map. But notice what they call hypocritical behavior is human behavior. And it's not an attack. It is an unseen process that people ordinarily, if they're alive, are hypocrites because what their very brain tells them, their central government tells them, every message that comes out of there is insincere, if there was some way to compare it. And that's why so much of human behavior is adjudicated to be hypocritical. That's why anybody can be attacked by anybody else as being a hypocrite. A shoemaker out there in St. Peter's Square, if he had a bullhorn, could jump up and holler at the Pope, "You old hypocrite!" And if the Pope could tell the truth and he could be sincere, which nobody can, the Pope would go, "Well, he got my number." Because everybody's a hypocrite. Everybody's insincere, but they don't know what the alternative is. There is none. So if you catch somebody and you grab them under some condition and say, "You're a hypocrite," to your mother, your father, your priest, your rabbi, and you say you're a hypocrite, and just as they think they're going to die, and they try to tell the truth. Suddenly they become sincere just in the process of it being in the state of a transient anomaly, and they go, "Yeah, you're right." And you say, "Well, why did you do that to me, my own mother, my own father?" And if they could still, in the throes of this transient anomaly, be sincere, they'd go, "I don't know, I didn't know what else to do. I just did what I did." And then when you let go of them, your mother or father could turn you and say, "By the way, why have you been so hypocritical? Why have you been so insincere all your life toward me?" And you go, "Geez, you're right, but there was nowhere else to go. You can only stand right here." And somebody says, "Don't stand there, it's hypocritical." And you go, "All right." And they say, "Well, don't stand there." You know, "I agree with you, I'm being insincere. It's an insincere stance. We'll change it." Notice one other thing right quick. When it comes to the everyday affairs of men, you're not arranged to actually be concerned that people are hypocritical or insincere. All you need, all ordinary people want, is proper leadership / dominance. You got a new Ferrari. I'd like to know how you got it, but anyway, you got a new Ferrari. In the little suburb where you live, you find one guy, he's got a reputation that he wears a white smock, and you got to make appointments, and he's the only guy that does work on high-performance Italian cars. And so you make arrangements with him to start doing the normal checkups and service. But then you begin to hear from other people that the guy's a crook, that he'll cheat you, that he'll tell you things that you need service that nobody. One good friend at a party, a guy you meet down the street that had a Ferrari, a Lamborghini. He said, "Yeah, I used him for a while, but I happened to be in Milan a couple of years ago, and I went by the factory, and some of the service that he's been charging me $2,000 a year to do some routine maintenance. I found out the factory said it was a joke. But we don't say that. Whoever the guy is, he made that up." And so you hear that, wait a minute, the guy is a hypocrite. The guy is insincere. Will that stop you from going ordinarily? Not hardly. Not if the guy is properly dominant. That you can hear stories, or a doctor. You can be going to a doctor and apparently being treated in a certain way for a certain complaint you have, and be at a cocktail party and somebody say, "You know, I went to a doctor one time that tried to treat me that way, and I found out that that treatment has been absolutely discredited." Will that stop you from going to that doctor? Not if the proper dance has been going on. Not if you have had the proper leadership. Not if he has been properly dominant. Do any of you hear me, or do I have to make up more examples? It sounds unreasonable. Maybe you don't want to laugh out loud to admit it. But you will hear from several sources that this mechanic is a crook. He's a hypocrite. He'll tell you one thing and it's not true, and he knows it's not. He's insincere. But you go there, the times you've already been there, it's like you go in and he is properly dominant. You know, he almost acts like a little Mussolini when you go in. And somewhere in your nervous system, some of your sovereign parts in your dialogue are telling you, reminding you, well, so-and-so says this guy will make you do service. He'll tell you got to, and even the factory says it's not true. And you'll continue to go back. All he's got to do is offer the right kind of dominance to you, the right kind of apparent leadership. And people wonder why. One group of people need another. How can this group of people put up with General so-and-so running that country for 20 years the way he mistreats everybody? Tut-tut. That's the same way that other people don't recognize is turn around to somebody that you don't like and say, how can they do what they do? Imagine what goes on in their brain. How can they live with themselves? Because they've got to be thinking all of these naughty, inhuman, antisocial thoughts, or they wouldn't behave that way. How can they live with themselves? That's like saying, how can they live under that dictatorship? That's like saying, how can those guys continue to take their car back to that guy when I know he's insincere? I know he can't be trusted. He's a hypocrite. that has hardly any value, any currency to ordinary people. The only reason that they will abandon the government, the only reason they'll abandon doing business, the only reason they'll abandon dancing with people sexually, financially, is if they're not in the proper dominant / submissive dance. But the idea of hypocrisy being tut, 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 or insincerity, not only being untoward and unacceptable and immoral, but at times dangerous. You shouldn't deal with people. Somebody working on your car, somebody working on your body like a doctor, and to find out they're insincere, somebody to point out they're insincere. A whole group of people say they're insincere. The guy's a hypocrite. A religious leader, he's a hypocrite. He rails out against certain behavior, and we catch him doing it. Ha ha ha. Like, boy, that'll wipe him out. Does it wipe him out? Not hardly. Hypocrisy is not much of an attack. Insincerity is hardly any cause to abandon somebody in the city, and it's never recognized. It's used as a dastardly attack on somebody to holler, he holds himself out to be a religious person or a leader of social causes, and I know for a fact he's a hypocrite. I know he's insincere. And people listen and go, well, notice you. What do you tell you? If you could look at yourself, if you had been all these years, or at least for a moment here, the way I'm talking, you would see that what you have been telling you, this part, the central government, has been hypocritical all its life, or to see that I've given you a fair description. What it tells you, it's got to be acting insincere. I'm being charitable to say, as the father told the kid, assume that it's acting insincere. It's got to be insincere. It tells you to do things. Does it help? It tells you to do things, and apparently a second later goes, well, you can't do that. And then a second after that it says, look at you. You can't do anything right. Is it trying to help you? Is it not a living example of hypocrisy? But do you turn on it? No. Do you turn on other people? Not if they're dominant enough. Hell, I'll vote for him again. If I had another car, well, yeah, I'd probably take it back to him. I don't know, I just like the guy. Well, I don't know, he seems sure of himself. Seems to know what he's doing in general. He may have his flaws here and there, but by and large, you know, the general has mistreated. He killed my first 2 wives, but no, I don't know. He seems like he knows what he's doing. He's got us on the right road. I was going to tonight, I didn't bring all the equipment. I was going to do a little magic such as make myself disappear.